The Deep Space Monitoring Station Delta-7 floated silently in the void, a small outpost of humanity on the edge of explored space. Most nights were quiet, with only the occasional burst of cosmic background radiation to break the monotony. This night was different. Lieutenant Kim Jun's shift had been uneventful until the alert pinged on his console. At first, he thought it was his system error. Signals this faint rarely made it through the automated filters. But as the pattern repeated, his training kicked in. His fingers flew across the holographic interface, isolating and amplifying the transmission. "That can't be right," he muttered to himself, running the signal through the translation matrix again. The results were the same. His heart pounded as he pressed the communication button. "Captain Park, you need to see this immediately." Captain Park's son had been reviewing crew performance reports in her office when the call came through. She heard the urgency in Kim's voice and responded without hesitation. Her boots echoed against the metal floors as she strode onto the command deck. "Report, Lieutenant," she said, her face a mask of professional calm despite the tension in the air. Kim pointed to his screen. "We're receiving a distress signal, Captain, from beyond the Cygnus boundary. It's—" He hesitated. "It's not one of ours." The revelation hung in the air. Humanity had encountered only 3 other intelligent species since venturing to the stars, and none of them had territory near the Cygnus boundary. Captain Park leaned closer to the screen, her dark eyes narrowing as she studied the fragmented message appearing in the translation matrix. "The signal composition is unlike anything in our databases," Kim continued, "but the universal translator is picking up emotional markers consistent with extreme distress." As they watched, words began to form on the screen, broken, disjointed, but unmistakable in their desperation. "Help, consuming US. Please. Anyone. Can you clean it up further?" Park asked. Kim worked the controls, filtering out background noise. More fragments appeared. "LIRIANIP opal. FIL days. The consumption a puro HCHAs. Warriors needed." Captain Park's face grew grim. "Record everything. I'm contacting Earth Command immediately. This falls far outside our protocols." The transmission to Earth took only minutes, but the response required hours of debate among the highest levels of Earth's government. The message was deemed significant enough to wake Defense Minister Kang in the middle of the night, who immediately called an emergency session of the United Defense Council. Meanwhile, on Delta-7, Captain Park and Lieutenant Kim continued to receive and translate the alien transmission. The picture it painted grew increasingly dire. A peaceful species called the Liriani faced extinction at the hands of something they only referred to as the consumption. 12 hours after the initial detection, Admiral Lee Hyun arrived at the United Defense Council chamber in Geneva. As commander of Earth's 7th Battle Group, she had been summoned to assess the military implications of the signal. The 7th was humanity's most advanced combat fleet, a collection of warships so powerful they had earned the nickname the Reapers, though never in official documentation. Admiral Lee stood tall before the semicircular table where the 12 council members sat. Her uniform was impeccable, her posture rigid with the discipline of 30 years in service. "Admiral," began Defense Minister Kang, "you've reviewed the transmission." "I have, Minister," she replied, her voice clear and confident. "My analysts have verified its authenticity. This is not a hoax or a trap. Something, is genuinely calling for help." "And your recommendation?" asked a counselor from the African Union. Admiral Lee didn't hesitate. "We respond immediately and with adequate force to assess and potentially counter this consumption threat." Murmurs spread through the chamber. The Eurasian representative leaned forward. "Admiral, we've only recently established ourselves as a spacefaring civilization. Our treaties with the Arcturians, the Vega Collective, and the Tau-Cetians are still in their infancy. Sending our most powerful battle group beyond established territories could be seen as aggressive expansion." With respect, Lee countered, If what the Liriani described is accurate, this isn't about politics. It's about preventing a massacre. The room fell silent. Defense Minister Kang removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The stakes are high, Admiral. If you engage, you won't just be representing Earth's military. You'll be defining humanity to an unknown number of species encountering us for the first time. Admiral Lee glanced at the holographic display, showing the distress signal's point of origin, a star system nearly 3 weeks away at maximum FTL speeds. The signal had taken much longer to reach them, meaning whatever catastrophe the Liriani feared might already be underway. I understand the diplomatic concerns, she said finally. But if we ignore this call, what does that say about humanity? What does it say about who we are? Her eyes swept across the council members. I've reviewed our first contact protocols extensively. Nowhere do they suggest we should ignore a direct plea for help. The chamber remained quiet as her words sank in. Finally, Minister Kang placed his glasses back on and looked up at Admiral Lee. Deploy your fleet, Admiral. You have authorization to investigate and render appropriate assistance. But understand this. Your decisions could shape interstellar relations for generations to come. Admiral Lee nodded, her expression remaining professionally blank, but those who knew her well could see the fierce determination in her eyes. Then let them see exactly what humanity stands for, she said quietly, and let us hope they find it worthy of respect. Within an hour, the encoded deployment orders flashed across space to the 17 warships of the 7th Battle Group. The dreadnought Indomitable, nearly a kilometer long and bristling with weapons technologies that had given even humanity's allies pause, began powering its FTL drives. Surrounding it, cruisers and destroyers prepared for what would be the longest deployment in Earth's brief interstellar history. As Admiral Lee boarded her shuttle to join her fleet, she wondered what they would find beyond the Cygnus boundary, and whether humanity's power would be enough to face whatever had frightened the Liriani so deeply. The space between stars rippled as reality bent and folded. A flash of blue light erupted in the darkness, and the massive dreadnought Indomitable tore through the fabric of space. 16 warships followed in perfect formation, engines glowing with barely contained energy. The 7th Battle Group had arrived. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Lee Hyun stood with her hands clasped behind her back. The 3-week journey at maximum FTL had given her time to prepare her crew, but nothing could have prepared them for what their sensors now revealed. "Sensors online," reported Commander Choi Jin from his station. His fingers danced across the holographic controls as data flowed in. His voice tightened as he processed the information. "Admiral, we have multiple hostile contacts surrounding the 3rd planet. Scans indicate orbital bombardment in progress." Admiral Lee's expression hardened. They had arrived in the middle of an attack. "Main screen on," she ordered. The massive view screen at the front of the bridge flickered to life. A beautiful blue-green world appeared, much like Earth but with more ocean coverage. Around it circled at least 30 vessels of alien design. They resembled predatory sea creatures, all sharp angles and protruding weapon ports. As the crew watched, one of the ships fired a beam of energy at the planet below. The impact created a flash visible, even from orbit. "Life signs on the planet?" Admiral Lee asked. Lieutenant Yoon at the biological sensors station nodded quickly. "Billions, Admiral. Concentrated in underwater structures and coastal regions. But the numbers are dropping as we watch." Commander Choi's console beeped urgently. "Admiral, we're being scanned by the hostile vessels. They've detected our presence." "Let them look," Admiral Lee said calmly. "Tactical, passive defensive screens only. Don't give them any reason to think we're hostile. Yet." She turned to the communications officer. "Open a channel to the planet's surface. See if anyone is still alive to talk." The communications officer worked quickly. "I've isolated what appears to be a government frequency, Admiral. Establishing connection now." The view screen shifted to show an alien face. The being had luminescent blue skin that seemed to shimmer with subtle patterns. Large, expressive eyes dominated a face that had no nose, only gill-like slits at the sides. When it spoke, a small mouth moved in ways that almost matched the translated words. "I am Representative Songjay of the Liriani Council," the alien said, voice filled with mixture of fear and desperate hope. You received our call." Admiral Lee stepped forward. "We did. I'm Admiral Lee Hyun of the Earth Fleet. We've come to assist." The alien's already large eyes widened further. "Humans." The translator caught a note of disbelief in the voice. "The stories were true. Your reputation precedes you." Admiral Lee raised an eyebrow, wondering what stories the Liriani had heard about humanity. Earth had only been a spacefaring civilization for less than a century. Before she could ask for clarification, a harsh sound cut across their communication channel. The view screen split to show another alien face. This one was reptilian with yellowish scales and vertical pupils in blood-red eyes. Sharp teeth flashed as it spoke in a guttural voice. "Unidentified vessels," it growled, the translator struggling to convert the harsh sounds into human language. "This harvest is claimed by the Vorax Collective. Depart immediately or be consumed." A cold anger settled in Admiral Lee's chest. "Harvest," she repeated quietly. She addressed the reptilian being directly. "This is not a harvest. These are people, and they've asked for our help." The Vorax commander made a sound that might have been laughter. "Primitive sentiment. The Liriani are food and resources, as you will be if you interfere. Final warning. Depart or join the consumption." The transmission cut off abruptly. The bridge fell silent as the crew looked to their admiral. Admiral Lee's lips curved into a cold smile that never reached her eyes. "Tactical, full analysis of Vorax vessels. Weapons Officer Park, warm up all systems but keep safeties engaged. Navigation, plot a course that will position our fleet between the Vorax ships and the planet." Commander Choi looked up from his station. "Admiral, the Vorax outnumber us almost 2-1. "Numbers aren't everything, Commander," Admiral Lee replied. "Communications, reopen the channel to Representative Song." When the Liriani appeared on screen again, Admiral Lee spoke with calm confidence. "Representative Song, we need to know more about these Vorax. How long have they been attacking your world?" 7 cycles, the Liriani replied, the translator converting to Earth Standard Days. "They appeared without warning. Our species has never developed weapons. We believe the galaxy was a peaceful place." A ripple of color passed over the alien skin, which the translator indicated was an expression of deep sadness. "We were wrong." Admiral Lee nodded. "Not entirely wrong, Representative. There is good in this galaxy, and it's worth fighting for." She straightened her uniform. "The Earth Fleet will engage the Vorax and drive them from your world. We request only that you move your people to the deepest shelters available." The Liriani's skin pulsed with patterns of blue and gold that the translator identified as hope and gratitude. "We will do as you ask, Admiral. May your victory be swift." As the communication ended, Admiral Lee turned to her bridge crew. "Battle stations. All hands prepare for combat operations." Her voice carried throughout the massive ship, steady and determined. "Navigation. Execute intercept pattern Delta. Position the fleet between the Vorax ships and the planet. Weapons, target analysis and lock, but hold fire until my command." The human warships moved with precision that would have impressed even the most experienced space tactician. The Indomitable took the center position, with cruisers and destroyers forming a protective screen around it. Within minutes, the 7th Battle Group had placed itself directly between the Vorax fleet and the Liriani homeworld. On the Vorax command ship, the fleet leader watched with growing rage as the human vessels deliberately blocked their bombardment paths. Back on the Indomitable, Admiral Lee stood tall on her bridge. "Open a fleet-wide channel," she ordered. When the communications officer nodded, she addressed all 17 ships at once. "This is Admiral Lee. The people of Earth have always stood against oppression and genocide. Today, we stand for the Liriani. Let's show these Vorax exactly who they're dealing with." As she finished speaking, the Vorax ships began to move into attack positions. The battle for the Liriani homeworld was about to begin. Lieutenant Yoon's fingers moved rapidly over his console as red warning lights flashed across his display. His eyes widened as he processed the tactical data flowing in. "Enemy vessels approaching, Admiral," he reported, his voice steady despite the tension building on the bridge. "They're launching fighters. Hundreds of them." The main view screen showed the Vorax fleet breaking formation, their ships spreading out to surround the human vessels. Small craft poured from their hangar bays like angry insects from a disturbed nest. Admiral Lee stood calmly in the center of the bridge, watching the tactical display with a practiced eye. Where others might see chaos, she saw patterns, weaknesses, opportunities. She had trained for this moment her entire career. "Deploy Aegis Defense Grid," she ordered, her voice clear and confident. "All ships maintain Formation Delta. Weapons free." Throughout the human fleet, weapon systems hummed to life. The Aegis Defense Grid, a network of interconnected energy shields and point defense weapons, activated in perfect synchronization across all 17 ships. Blue energy fields shimmered into existence, overlapping to create layers of protection. On the planet below, the Liriani watched in awe. Their underwater observation centers captured the battle unfolding above their world. They had never seen combat on this scale. As a peaceful species, they had no concept of organized warfare, no understanding of tactical maneuvers or defense systems. What they witnessed now seemed like magic. The first wave of Vorax fighters crashed against the human defenses like water against stone. Lasers and kinetic weapons fire from the Vorax craft splashed harmlessly against the Aegis shields. The point defense guns on the human ships tracked and fired with impossible precision, turning dozens of enemy fighters into expanding clouds of debris. "They're focusing fire on the Resolute," reported Commander Choi, indicating one of the human cruisers on the tactical display. "Shield strength holding at 87%. Admiral Lee nodded. "Rotate shield frequencies on all vessels. Match their attack patterns and counter." On the bridge of the Vorax command ship, War Leader Drac watched in growing anger as his first attack wave failed to make any significant impact. His scaled hand slammed down on the arm of his command chair. "Impossible," he hissed, yellow eyes narrowing to slits. "Their technology shouldn't be this advanced. No prey species has ever." "Sir," interrupted his second-in-command, pointing urgently at the sensor display. "The human vessels. They're deploying some kind of autonomous weapon platforms." Drac leaned forward, his reptilian features twisting in surprise. From the hangar bays of the human ships emerged what looked like small, unmanned craft. Hundreds of them, moving in perfect coordination like schools of predatory fish. "What are those?" he demanded. "Unknown, War Leader," his tactical officer replied. "But they're moving to intercept our second attack wave." On the Indomitable, Weapons Officer Park monitored the deployment of the ACER drones, autonomous combat and engagement robots. Each one was the size of a small car, packed with weapons and guided by a distributed AI network that allowed them to function as a single organism. "ACER units deployed, Admiral," he reported, "all functioning at optimal capacity." Admiral Lee watched as the drones formed a protective screen around the human fleet. "Begin offensive pattern Talon. Target their command vessels first." The battle that followed was unlike anything the Liriani had ever witnessed. The human vessels moved with impossible precision, their defensive systems intercepting incoming fire while their own weapons tore through the Vorax shields. The ACER drones wove complex patterns through space, drawing enemy fire and then retaliating with devastating accuracy. A Vorax destroyer exploded in a brilliant flash of light as concentrated fire from 3 human cruisers overwhelmed its shields. 2 more Vorax vessels, their engines disabled by precision strikes from the ACER drones, drifted helplessly in space. On the Vorax command ship, alarms blared as system after system reported damage. War Leader Drac gripped his command chair as the ship shuddered under another impact. "How is this possible?" he growled. "Increase power to forward shields. Launch all remaining fighters." "Sir," his tactical officer's voice wavered. "The human drones, they are systematically dismantling our defensive perimeter. They're targeting shield generators with surgical precision." Another explosion rocked the ship. Drac's second-in-command looked up from his console, fear evident in his eyes. "We've lost the Devourer and the Harvester," he reported. "The Dominator's engines are disabled. Our formation is breaking down." For the first time in his long military career, War Leader Drac felt something unfamiliar: doubt. The Vorax had conquered dozens of species across 3 sectors of space. None had ever mounted an effective defense, let alone pushed back a Vorax assault force. 2 hours into the battle, half the Vorax fleet was either destroyed or in retreat. Those ships still capable of fighting had pulled back to regroup, their formation in disarray. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Lee surveyed the tactical display with satisfaction. The human fleet had suffered only minor damage. 2 destroyers had taken hits to their outer hull, but their critical systems remained intact. Not a single human life had been lost. "Open a channel to the remaining enemy vessels," she ordered. When the communications officer nodded, Admiral Lee straightened her uniform and faced the view screen. The scaled face of War Leader Drac appeared, his yellow eyes burning with hatred. "This is your only warning," Admiral Lee stated, her voice level but firm. "Leave this system and never return. Any further aggression against the Liriani will be met with the full force of Earth's military." Drac's response came as a stream of hissed threats and promises of retribution. The translator struggled to keep up with the guttural language, but the meaning was clear. The Vorax would not accept defeat. As the transmission ended, Admiral Lee sighed and shook her head. "They never learned, do they?" she murmured. Then, with renewed resolve in her voice, she addressed her bridge crew. "All ships, prepare for Phase 2. Commander Choi approached her station. "The Vorax are regrouping at the edge of the system. Admiral, intelligence suggests they're calling for reinforcements." Admiral Lee nodded. "As expected, they're not used to losing." She tapped her console, bringing up a secure channel to Earth Command. "It's time to show them exactly what they're dealing with. Prepare to deploy the Nemesis Protocol." Throughout the human fleet, crews began preparations for a longer, more intense battle. They had won the first engagement, but Admiral Lee knew the real test was yet to come. The Vorax would return in greater numbers, and when they did, humanity would need to demonstrate why even the peaceful races of the galaxy spoke their name with a mixture of hope and fear. 3 days passed in relative quiet. The human fleet used this time to repair minor damage and establish a defensive perimeter around the Liriani homeworld. Admiral Lee coordinated with Liriani leaders, helping them organize evacuation plans for their most vulnerable population centers. On the morning of the 4th day, Lieutenant Yun's voice broke the calm on the Indomitable's bridge. "Admiral, long-range sensors are picking up multiple FTL signatures at the edge of the system," he reported, his fingers moving rapidly over his console. "Big ones." Admiral Lee was at his station in seconds, leaning over to study the readouts. Her face remained calm, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "How many?" "Over 150 vessels." "Admiral," Lieutenant Yun replied, 5 times larger than the previous force. "They're arranging themselves in attack formation." Commander Choi joined them at the sensor station. "They'd brought their entire regional fleet," he said quietly. "Intelligence suggests they pulled ships from 3 neighboring star systems." Admiral Lee straightened up. "They're not used to losing. That makes them predictable." She tapped her communication badge. "Lee to all ships. Battle stations." Throughout the human fleet, alarm klaxons sounded as crews rushed to their posts. Weapon systems powered up, shields strengthened, and engines hummed with contained energy, ready to maneuver at a moment's notice. Admiral Lee transported down to the underwater command center on the Liriani homeworld for a final consultation with their leadership. The Liriani had converted a vast chamber of living coral into a war room, with holographic displays showing the positions of all vessels in their system. Representative Song stood before the main tactical display, his blue skin pulsing with patterns that the translator interpreted as extreme distress. As Admiral Lee entered, he turned to face her, large eyes filled with concern. "Your bravery was admirable," he said, his voice soft and melodic despite the dire circumstances. "But perhaps you should withdraw your forces. We cannot ask you to sacrifice yourselves against such overwhelming numbers." Several other Liriani council members rippled their agreement, their skin flashing in patterns of blue and green. They had witnessed the power of the human fleet during the first engagement, but even they could see that this new Vorax armada was on another scale entirely. Admiral Lee's expression never changed. "That's not how humans operate, Representative Song," she said calmly. She stepped forward to stand beside him at the tactical display. "We don't abandon those who ask for our help, and we don't run from bullies." She tapped her communication badge again. "Commander Choi, status of Nemesis deployment." The commander's voice came through clearly. "All units ready, Admiral." Lee nodded, though her officer couldn't see it. "Execute." Representative Song looked confused. "Nemesis?" he asked. Admiral Lee didn't respond immediately. Instead, she gestured toward the tactical display. "Watch." On the screen, small objects began to emerge from the cargo holds of the human vessels. They looked like ordinary supply containers, rectangular and unimpressive. As they drifted into space, however, they began to change. Panels unfolded, revealing complex machinery inside. Robotic arms extended, and power cores activated with a soft blue glow. "What are those?" asked Representative Song, his skin rippling with curious patterns. Admiral Lee's eyes never left the tactical display. "The reason why Earth has never been successfully invaded." The Liriani Council members watched in fascination as the containers completed their transformation into what appeared to be automated manufacturing platforms. Each was about the size of a small shuttle, bristling with fabrication arms and assembly modules. "We call it the Nemesis Protocol," Admiral Lee explained. "Networked emergency manufacturing and engagement system for interstellar security. Each unit contains the blueprints for thousands of combat drones and the ability to build them using raw materials from space debris or even enemy wreckage." As she spoke, the Nemesis units began to work. They captured floating debris from the previous battle and broke it down into component materials. Then, with astonishing speed, they began assembling small combat drones. Each drone was about the size of a human hand, equipped with a single weapon and minimal shielding, but designed to work in concert with thousands of others. "The first generation is simple," Admiral Lee continued, "but each drone feeds battle data back to the Nemesis units. Each new generation adapts and improves, becoming more effective against specific enemy tactics and technologies." Within an hour, hundreds of drones surrounded each human ship. Within 2 hours, the number had grown to thousands. By the third hour, the space around the human fleet swarmed with tens of thousands of autonomous weapons, forming a living defensive screen that shifted and moved like a single organism. When the Vorax fleet finally closed to attack range, they found themselves facing not just 17 human warships, but a cloud of adaptive weapons that grew denser with every passing minute. War Leader Drac, now aboard the Vorax Super Dreadnought Annihilator, watched the sensor readings with growing concern. "What is this?" he demanded of his science officer. "Some kind of illusion." "No, War Leader," the science officer replied, his scales paling slightly. "They appear to be self-replicating combat units. Our sensors detect new ones being created even as we speak." Drac hissed in anger. "Impossible. No species has mastered such technology." Nevertheless, he could not deny the evidence before him. "It changes nothing. Begin the attack. Overwhelm them with numbers." The Vorax fleet surged forward, thousands of fighters launching from their carriers. The space between the two fleets filled with weapons fire, a dazzling display of destructive energy that would have incinerated any conventional defense. But the human defense was not conventional. The Nemesis-produced drones moved in perfect coordination, creating gaps just large enough for enemy fire to pass through harmlessly, then closing ranks and counterattacking with precision strikes against Vorax shield generators and weapon ports. As the battle progressed, the Vorax noticed something disturbing. Each time they adapted their tactics, the human drones would respond with a new countermeasure within minutes. When they changed shield frequencies, the next wave of drones would be equipped with weapons calibrated to those exact frequencies. When they tried to jam communication signals, the drones would switch to an entirely new method of coordination. The human fleet was learning, adapting, evolving in real time. 6 hours into the battle, a Vorax light cruiser was disabled and boarded by human special forces. They captured its sub-commander and brought him to the Indomitable for interrogation. The Vorax officer was escorted onto the bridge in restraints. His yellow eyes burned with hatred as he was brought before Admiral Lee. "Your species is supposed to be primitive," he snarled, the translator converting his hisses and growls into understandable speech. "How did you develop such weapons?" Admiral Lee studied him calmly. "We evolved on a world where everything tried to kill us," she replied, "including each other. And when we weren't fighting, we were preparing for the next fight." She stepped closer to the captured Vorax. "You see us as prey because we're not conquerors. But you've made a critical mistake. Humans don't need to conquer to be dangerous. We just need to be threatened." The final confrontation came at dawn. Ship time. Sensors detected the main Vorax armada arriving at the edge of the system. Nearly 100 capital ships arranged in perfect attack formation. Their massive flagship, twice the size of the Indomitable, led the formation. Admiral Lee stood on the bridge, her uniform crisp despite days with little sleep. She had been preparing for this moment her entire career, though she never imagined it would happen in defense of an alien world. "All personnel to battle stations," she ordered, her voice calm but firm. "Nemesis swarms to full production. Deploy the Thanatos Protocol." Commander Choi looked up sharply. "The Thanatos Protocol, Admiral. That's never been used outside of simulations." "There's always a first time, Commander," Admiral Lee replied. "Execute the order." Throughout the human fleet, crews scrambled to their posts. The Nemesis units increased their production rate, creating combat drones at an astonishing pace. But now they were producing something new, larger units equipped with more powerful weapons and experimental technology that Earth Command had developed but never deployed in actual combat. For the first time, the 7th Battle Group's true capabilities were unleashed. The Dreadnought Indomitable's main cannon charge, a weapon so powerful it could crack a small moon. The cruisers and destroyers moved into positions that created overlapping fields of fire, leaving no safe approach for the enemy. As the Vorax fleet closed in, they expected to face the same tactics as before. They were unprepared for what happened next. The human warships executed maneuvers that seemed to defy physics, changing direction instantaneously without the expected momentum effects. The Nemesis units swarmed through space like metallic locusts, no longer just defending but actively hunting Vorax ships. War leader Drac watched in growing horror as his carefully planned assault fell apart. "How are they moving like that?" he demanded. "It violates the laws of physics." His science officer's scales had paled to a sickly yellow. "They're using localized gravity distortion, war leader. They're bending space itself around their ships." On the planet below, the Lyriani gathered in their underwater observation centers, watching as the night sky lit up with the flashes of battle. Even through the ocean waters, they could see explosions that rivaled small stars in brightness. Representative Song stood next to Commander Han, the human liaison officer who had remained on the planet. The Lyriani's skin rippled with patterns of awe and fear as he watched the battle unfold. "They fight as if they were born for it," whispered Representative Song. Commander Han nodded, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. "In a way we were," she replied quietly. "Our history is written in conflict, but we learned that the greatest purpose of strength is to protect those who cannot protect themselves." As the battle raged above them, something unexpected happened. The Liriani Council members began to discuss how they might help. Though they had no weapons or warships, they possessed something unique, their natural bioelectric abilities. "We cannot fight," said Elder Shin, the oldest member of the council. "But perhaps we can confuse." Using the underwater communication networks that spanned their oceans, the Liriani began to coordinate. Millions of them focused their bioelectric organs in unison, creating powerful electromagnetic pulses that rose from the oceans and spread through the planet's upper atmosphere. On the Vorax ships, communication systems suddenly filled with static. Targeting computers reset unexpectedly. Navigation data became corrupted. "What's happening?" War Leader Drac demanded as his view screen flickered and died. "Some kind of planetary-scale interference," his communications officer replied. "It's coming from the oceans." The human fleet, warned in advance by Commander Han, had adjusted their systems to filter out the Liriani interference. They pressed their advantage mercilessly. The Indomitable's main cannon fired, the energy beam cutting through 3 Vorax cruisers before dissipating. Nemesis drones swarmed over Vorax ships like angry insects, finding and exploiting weaknesses in their defensive systems. By the second day of battle, a third of the Vorax fleet had been destroyed or disabled. By the third day, it was over. War Leader Drac's flagship, the last major Vorax vessel still fighting, attempted to flee the system. It didn't make it to the jump point. The remnants of the once mighty Vorax fleet scattered across the stars, bringing word of the terrible defenders now protecting the Liriani. As the final Vorax ships disappeared from sensors, a cheer went up throughout the human fleet. They had faced overwhelming odds and emerged victorious, with surprisingly few casualties. Only 1 destroyer had been lost, and even then, most of its crew had been rescued. The weeks that followed brought unexpected developments. Word spread quickly through nearby star systems. Within a month, delegations from a dozen previously subjugated species arrived, seeking alliance with Earth and its fearsome protectors. Species that had hidden from the Vorax for generations now emerge, offering friendship and trade. One evening, 2 weeks after the final battle, Admiral Lee stood on the observation deck of the Indomitable, watching as the first permanent Earth defense station took shape in orbit around the Liriani homeworld. Construction drones moved in perfect coordination, assembling the massive structure piece by piece. Captain Park entered the observation deck and approached quietly. "Quite a view," she said, standing beside the Admiral. "Indeed," Admiral Lee replied. "Earth Command has approved our request for a permanent presence here," Captain Park continued. "They're sending 3 more battle groups and a diplomatic corps. It seems we're establishing our first official colony in this sector." Admiral Lee nodded. "The first of many, I expect." Captain Park studied her commanding officer's profile. "Was it worth it?" she asked. "Risking the fleet, revealing our military capabilities to the galaxy?" Admiral Lee didn't answer immediately. She watched as a group of Liriani ships rose from the ocean below, their elegant designs reflecting the setting sun. They moved confidently now, without fear of attack from above. "Look at them," she said finally. "For generations, they lived in fear. Now they're building a future." She gestured to the stars beyond. "And we found our place out here." Below, on the Liriani homeworld, changes were already taking place. With the Vorax threat removed, the Liriani began to expand their civilization to the planet's surface for the first time in generations. In the Great Archive, housed in a beautiful structure of living coral, historian Joe Min recorded the events for future generations. His final entry read, "They came from a distant blue world, summoned by our desperate call. In their ships of steel and determination was our salvation, and in their unexpected compassion, the foundation of a new age for all who seek peace among the stars." Throughout the sector, Word spread of the species called humans, who had faced the dreaded Vorax and driven them back. Some spoke of them with fear, others with hope. But all agreed on one thing. The galaxy had changed forever when that desperate SOS had summoned humanity's deadliest fleet.